In this video, I share my thoughts on the process of wiring my basement prior to getting started and then after I complete the rough wiring. As you can clearly see, my basement is already complete, but I'm still in the process of editing all the videos that I had recorded earlier. I won't be covering the physical process of wiring my basement, as I believe there are many good tutorials already available online. Plus, I don't consider myself qualified to provide detailed wiring advice. Instead, I will go over my thinking with regard to the number and placement of outlets and lights, along with the number and sizes of circuits that I used. I will also discuss the lighting that we used and the compatible dimmers. I will also discuss some additional infrastructure and a few tips or ideas to consider as you design the wiring for your basement project. Some of this could be added prior to framing. For my thoughts on adding infrastructure prior to framing, see this video. I will also provide a link in the description below. I have two main spaces in our basement, plus a cedar closet, a closet under the stairs, and a utility room, along with the stairwell. The larger of the two spaces will house my wife's quilt machine. She will need reasonably bright and uniform lighting with a decent color rendering index. For this, we have selected 2x4 foot LED panels that are color temperature selectable and are 0 to 10 volt dimmable. This will require the use of 0 to 10 volt compatible dimmers. We will install 3 strips of LED panels, with each strip controlled independently by their own dimmer. For outlets, I will place an outlet nominally every 4 feet, with 2 additional outlets at more of a counter height for more accessibility above tables and such. I will also provide an outlet along with wired internet and coax for a wall-mounted TV. Finally, the quilt machine is meant to have its own dedicated circuit. Since the machine will stand in the center of the room, I plan to place an outlet in the ceiling. We will have a 4-gang switch box for the LED panels in the quilt room, plus a toggle switch for the light in the cedar closet. I purchased a single 2x4 foot LED panel along with a 0 to 10 volt dimmer, which I wired up temporarily to test. I also purchased a 6-inch by 24-inch LED panel for use in the cedar closet, along with a 7.5-inch square LED panel to use in the stairwell. In the end, we decided to use the same 6-inch by 24-inch panel. We also decided to place another panel at the top of the stairs to better light the stairwell. The 7.5-inch square LED panel was perfect for use in the closet under the stairs. The takeaway is, consider selecting the lighting fixtures you intend to use. Purchase one of each and test them to determine if they will ultimately meet your needs. The other main space in our basement is for my shop, a space I previously used for electronic assembly, but will also now be used for building plastic models. I'm excited to finally have a spray paint booth for airbrushing paint. Since this is a workshop and could potentially house multiple machines and power tools, I will install multiple outlets and 2 20-amp circuits. I can foresee this space having varied uses in the future, both for me and a future owner. The question is, how many outlets should I install and where? First of all, if time and finances permit, consider adding a subpanel to your basement. For one thing, if your basement contains the mechanical infrastructure for your home, such as a furnace, a sump pump, a freezer, and so on, it's extremely handy to have the breakers for those appliances contained in the same space. But having a dedicated breaker panel for the basement with available breaker space considerably improves the convenience of wiring. I highly recommend installing one. For those new to house wiring and subpanels, here in the US, a 2-pole 240 volt breaker is installed in the main panel. In my case, a 60 amp 2-pole breaker installed in the main panel in my garage, which feeds a suitably sized cable that is connected to the mains terminal on a subpanel, in this case a basement. This subpanel will typically have more breaker spaces than the two consumed by the 2-pole breaker added to the main breaker panel. Of course, should you choose to do this, please hire a licensed electrician or follow all applicable federal, state, and local building codes for your jurisdiction. I started thinking more seriously about where I will install the outlets, switches, and lights, along with the types of lights we will use. Since I now own one, I will use my laser level to locate the height of the boxes, rather than measuring up from the floor, given that I know my floor is uneven. I start off by purchasing a number of outlet boxes and installing them temporarily using small screws. It may seem like I went a bit overboard here, but as I like to say, if some is good and more is better, then too much is just enough. Think about how you use your kitchen, for example. I place more boxes in the upper locations for convenient access above workbenches and tables. The lower outlets are meant to service more permanent tools and machines, or even power strips as needed. I'm also paying attention to symmetry and spacing. In this case, I'm going for every other stud bay, or 32 inches, on the upper outlets, and 3 stud bays, or 48 inches, on the lower outlets. The orange box on the far wall is for wired internet. I know, this is falling out of favor, but it's my basement. Also note that the boxes that I used for the interior walls are adjustable for wall thickness, as I plan on hanging soundboard in addition to drywall to help isolate sound and noise. I'll cover this in the next video on insulation. I was unable to find any adjustable thickness low voltage boxes, so I used the same adjustable electrical boxes in several places for my low voltage applications. Once I settled on the final placement of the outlet boxes, I permanently secured them with nails. I used two 20 amp branch circuits in both the shop and the quilt room using 12-2-2 Romex. This cable has 2 independent neutrals as well as 2 line voltage wires and a ground wire. I ran the 12-2-2 cable to each upper outlet box in my shop. Then, I can select either of the 2 branch circuits to use for each outlet. The idea is to alternate the branch circuits from outlet to outlet to spread the load as needed. The lower outlets are fed from one of the upper outlets using 12-2 Romex, with ground of course. The other thing to consider is adding dedicated outlets. In our case, we have a dedicated ceiling outlet with its own branch circuit and breaker for my wife's quilt machine. I also have an outlet for a wall-mounted TV and a future stereo in my shop. We have a few convenience outlets. These are outlets that are not in a practical location for any permanent appliance, but may prove handy for temporary use. I've already used both. I also placed an outlet in the closet under the stairs to plug in a cordless vacuum cleaner. It's all about convenience and future-proofing. Consider installing 0 to 10 volt dimmers for lighting if dimming is important to you. You'll find you have much finer control, and the lights themselves are less likely to buzz. For this, you will need to run a secondary low-voltage cable. In our case, we are installing a suspended ceiling, so the lights get installed later. As a result, I extended the whips between the floor joists that are unterminated and longer than necessary. These are wired once the LED panels are placed. We decided to err on having more light than less, since we can dim them. We now have very nice, even lighting. My wife is very happy. Need I say more? I installed 3 ceiling boxes for lights below the soffit in my shop to offset the shadow that the soffit will cast from the overhead lights and to provide additional task lighting. We added a light to the top of the stairwell using a shallow, half-inch deep metal pancake box. This was a real pain to install, but in the end it was worth it. Here's a few additional tips. Think about any low-voltage wiring you may need. I added wired internet in multiple locations, including for a wall-mounted TV and my shop stereo, along with coax cable. I have a low-voltage line to interconnect our smoke detectors. But now would also be a good time to think about speaker wires, a doorbell, or anything else you can think to add now, before covering everything up with insulation and drywall. When I installed my breaker subpanel, I installed it on the concrete wall, which I had previously finished using joint compound. I also installed lengths of conduit to neaten up the installation. I did this by transferring the location of the knockouts on the breaker panel to a piece of paper, then using this drawing as a guide to drill holes in a piece of pine that I secured to the floor joists above. Since I do not yet have a stereo or speakers installed in my shop, I instead installed an empty outlet box and a short length of conduit between it and the ceiling. Since I will install a drop ceiling, I can run speaker wires later. But you can also run conduit in the walls and ceiling for future use. I did this in our family room for our TV, both for HDMI, optical fiber audio, and a subwoofer. I also have conduit running from the entertainment center to the basement. I did the same for a future TV upgrade in our bedroom, should fiber become an option at some point. Another thing that I did, again, given we will have a drop ceiling, I drilled a series of holes through the floor joist parallel to the outer walls of each room to make it easier to add wiring later. I already used this feature when we finally got cable internet available in our neighborhood. It would have been a pain and a mess to drill holes after the ceiling was hung, and I did not want to simply lay the cable on top of the ceiling tiles and grid. When pre-wiring, I consistently ran the input cable in on the left side of each box and out on the right. This made it much easier to know which cable went where once the outer jacket was stripped off of all the cables, which I did prior to installing drywall. I also labeled the cables at the ends when there was a chance of losing track of which cable was which. For example, at the feed end near the breaker panel and within the ceiling boxes. If you got something useful out of this video, give me a like below and comment either way. I will do my best to respond to your questions. Please consider subscribing to my channel to follow along with me on my basement project. And if you do, you get to see me in the next video.